take something home today. Obviously, if you've been doing this before, there's probably more things that have stayed the same that have changed, but there's plenty to learn in the next couple hours or so. Excuse me. So welcome to the DA Administrators Workshop. My name is Abe Christ. I am joined today by my colleagues in the Performance Office, Deirdre Ducharme and Katie Seifert. And there's some other my colleagues who are here as well. I don't want to name them all because there's a whole bunch of them. Well, I'll try. Michelle Rosado, Jeff Gregg, Christy Alberino, Kim Johnson. Am I missing anybody? I think that's it. Anybody want to say hi before I roll through the slide, other than Deirdre and Katie, since we'll hear from you in a few minutes.
Hi, everybody. This is Michelle Rosado. Just wanted to say hi. I mainly work on the SAT, but it's nice to see so many people joining.
Thanks, Michelle. All right. Well, anybody else? I see Jeff. Hi, everyone. And I know, like I said, Kim Johnson and Christy Alberino are on the call as well. So our great colleagues. So also on the call today is Jen Cho from Cambium Assessment. She's here to cover a lot of the system updates. So let's get started. Enjoy the session today. Obviously, it's about our Smarter Balance Administration, NGSS Administration, our Connecticut Alternate Assessment Administration. And thanks also for taking the time to attend today. Okay, a couple reminders to make the meeting a success. First of all, the slide deck should be in the chat. You'll see that. The meeting is being recorded. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our student assessment training page very soon. Also, all attendees are on mute, but we will be monitoring the chat and we'll respond if we do not get to your questions. Please email us at ctstudentassessment@ct.gov. We will be stopping a couple times during the presentation to do the old raise your hand and ask questions verbally. So if you want to do that, we welcome the participation as far as that goes. And then thanks, of course, for your ongoing support and partnership. I know many of you have been doing this a long time, and it's great to see many of you back and enjoy the meeting. Okay, so how does all this work happen? This is a snapshot of our Performance Office team. I want to point out in particular, this year we have a new staff member here that's on the slide, Kim Johnson. Welcome, Kim. You might talk to Kim if you do call the office. We have lost some team members over the years, so you will see some new faces. On this slide, you'll see all of our areas, whether it's EdSite, data collection, student assessment, our special analysis team. Also new here is Katie Seifert. Katie's going to be presenting in a little while. Welcome, Katie, as well as Sam Kamen and Phil Gillette. Sadly, just a note, Janet Stuck did leave finally within the last month or so. So if you email Janet, you will get a permanent out of office message. We missed Janet already, and it's barely been a couple weeks. Here's the Cambium assessment team, Jen Cho, Marie Musumeci, and Christine Jung. This is their contact information. Jen, as you know, the program director is many of you know Jen. She's been supporting us for years on this contract. It's awesome to have Jen back, and she will be covering the Cambium system slides coming up in a few minutes. Okay, so what are we talking about today? First, we're going to do an overview of the assessments. Then we're going to touch on the Cambium system overview and then a special populations update. The estimated time is probably a couple hours. We don't plan on taking a break. We're going to roll right into these. So if you do need to take a break, do what you have to do, obviously. Okay. So we're going to start with some basic information, especially for those of you that are new. First off is our contact information and why and when you would be contacting us. Our performance office is here, our number as well as our email, when you would be contacting us. Also the Connecticut Cambium Help Desk, when you would be contacting them, as well as their number and email. This is a key slide, especially if you're new. I know Cambium does a great job being responsive. I know I work in the performance office, but I have to say we do a terrific job of of trying to get back to you as soon as possible, even if we don't know the answer at that moment. So if you do have questions, please email us or phone us. And I know many of you have relationships with particular members of our team. Feel free to use that avenue as well. We will be resuming our 2023 assessment office hours this year, beginning on April 4th and running till May 30th at 3 p.m. The topics will be Smarter Balanced, NGSS, our alternates. We will be sending a meeting out to a meeting invite to all DAs and posting information in our student assessment news in the next month or so. Please note there are also office hour for our Lost Links assessment, our KELP assessment, and our Connecticut SAT school day assessment. All these can be viewed on our student assessment training webpage, where we list everything that's cited on this slide. Okay, here's our testing calendar. This is just a snapshot of what's coming. This shouldn't be a surprise really to any of you. A couple things I would like to note is that our KELP assessment site changed slightly this year. It's running from February 1st to March 29th. So mark that on your calendar if you haven't already. Notice also that our high school science assessment is starting in several weeks, actually, on February 5th. And then, and maybe one of my colleagues can do this because I don't have it on hand. One thing I do want to note is we've already knocked out our 2024 calendar. So for those of you that are that forward thinking, whether it's your board or at your schools, we do have our 25 calendar. There's not too many changes in that one. It's very similar to this, but we do have the specific dates. Okay, so what remains the same this year? I would say in general, a lot more remains the same than is different. So you can rest easy if you are new or you're a veteran DA. HIDE is still being provisioned as the student management system. So uploads will come from PSIS every night, like in the past. Updates made to the student registration and demographics will be reflected in TIDE. It is very important that you have a relationship with your PSIS coordinators and make sure the data is correct in there, because then you will ensure that it's correct in TIDE. As I mentioned earlier, we will be holding office hours again. They will be held Thursdays at 3 p.m. beginning on April 4th. Links will be in the student assessment news, and we will be sending out a calendar invite to all DAs prior to our first office hours. I sort of touched on this before as far as the TIDE system, but the importance of maintaining your data in PSIS Reg. Please make sure that is maintained correctly. It's very good practice if you're new to get to know your PSIS person in district. That will serve you well. We are doing again this year the rolling release of results. They are back. Generally, 10 days after testing has been completed by a student, you will have access to the results in the CRS, the centralized reporting system. This, like last year, will begin in about mid-May, so you will have student results in the CRS by then. Please take note of this. This has been used by a lot of districts. Again, rolling release results mid-May, they're coming. The test delivery system remains the same. The components that have successfully been implemented over the past few years are back. The tests are the same. In order to measure change, keep the measuring stick the same. We're definitely doing that this year, so none of the tests have changed. All are the same. The policies and procedures for testing students enrolled at private approved and PSIS registered out-of-state or in-state facilities remain the same. Please see the hyperlink here if you want to know how to do that. Again, that's probably not a lot of kids, but it will affect most districts. All students, next stop point, all students registered in PSIS and tested grades will participate in our summative assessments. Students in grades K through 12 who are duly identified as EL or ML and have a significant cognitive disability that requires the CTAA or the Connecticut Alternate Assessment will also participate in KELP from February 1st to March 29th. We've updated our teacher training deck that will be back for this year, which should be out. We will be emailing you likely next week. I know many of you have requested that and appreciated that. That's being updated. And then finally, procedures remain the same for identifying students eligible for an early stopping rule. Please refer to the hyperlinked resources for more information and details on deadlines. So you saw that list was larger than this list, so that's good news. This is the bigger what's new in 2024. What is what's new? First off, the continued integration of CT SEDS, alternate assessment eligibility data for implemented IEPs, and I said continued, I really mean the first time for that, we're pulling the alternate eligibility data from there, so that's coming. More information will be provided in a few minutes when Deirdre and Katie touch on that, but we are implementing that this year. We've updated our test administration manuals. Hard copies should be delivered by the end of this month. I'll repeat, by the end of this month. We get that question all the time. I'll repeat it again, the end of this month. There is a new secure browser that has always been this case every year. Cambium will address the details of that when they discuss things. Jen will address that in a few minutes. This one is a biggie, the fourth bullet. We will be delivering ISR PDFs to the Secure File Center in Tide earlier this year. So to give you some context, in the past, well, last year we just started doing that, but it wasn't until the end of August. This year we're going to be doing it in early August, and the student paper ISRs will be coming very soon after. So both in early August. So for those of you that decide to deliver the ISRs electronically to your parents and guardians, you will have these, and then you'll also have the paper copies on hand to deliver as well. Another new thing we're doing are sensible assessment webinars. This is a new effort from our office where we will be looking to highlight some of the tools from our formative and interim assessments. We will also, we're also inviting districts to share out on their implementation of sensible assessments. In fact, if you'd like to volunteer, you can get the volunteer information and information on the webinars in the linked edition of the Student Assessment News on this slide. And then finally, the attestation page. In short, we'll be asking districts, TAs, to attest to their taking a summative assessment this year to eliminate any confusion about taking an interim. More information on this effort in a slide or so. Okay, moving on. State policy regarding participation. So this is the language that drives our summative assessment testing for reading, writing, and science. In part because of the federal law and also this state law, this is really why we gather here today. We just cite these as these are the statutes if needed when communicating with parents or guardians or anybody else in your district. Okay, on to the Tide PSIS sync, which I was stressing a little bit earlier. District administrators really need to work with their PSIS coordinators to ensure accurate student information is reported in the PSIS registration module. As I mentioned earlier, during the test window, changes made in PSIS registration will automatically be updated in Tide. Please note, and also note that the IEP status is coming from PSIS registration. Again, just to ease your any concerns about, oh my goodness, this is new this year, I got to take notes. For those of you that have been in the game for a while, this is the same deal as we've been doing for the last few years. Okay, there's a lot on this slide. We'll try to get through it quickly. These are some important PSIS Tide data sync facts. Student demographics values will be saved and the fields locked in PSIS on May 31st, 2024. It's really important that, again, you work with your PSIS person to make sure that data is accurate. Any changes to a student's status must be made by May 31st, 2024. As noted at the bottom here, there are different dates for LAS, which is March 1st, March 28th for KELP, April 19th for the SAT, and then the May 31st date. A couple things worth mentioning in particular on this slide are, first of all, the student's grade in PSIS is the grade in which the test is given. So if you think a student is in grade 6, but PSIS is noted as grade 7, they're going to get a grade 7 test. Keep that in mind. Also, grade 11 skippers are not tested. So those are students who might, and you all know why this would be happening more than we would even in this office, but some students do magically go from 10 to 12 for various reasons. Those students would not be tested because, quite frankly, they're not in PSIS to be pulled into TIDE for testing. All right, I'm going to move on, but I would note some of these other important facts too. This is the TIDE PSIS DataSync student status change slide where there's a lot going on here. We're not going to spend too much time on this, but if you are working with your PSIS person and if you have students who experience a status change during testing, please follow these rules. Again, I would recommend checking in with your PSIS person so they can properly implement these suggestions when student statuses change and happen. Okay, I'm going to take one minute here. You can either, I know my colleagues have been sort of keeping an eye on the chat, not too well, but I know my colleagues have been watching the chat, so they've been probably hitting that. But also, is there anybody who wants to raise their hand and ask a question? And Katie and Dee, I know you've been, if you see anything in particular, I have been watching the chat. If anything you want to jump in on, feel free to. Or not, that's fine too, because I know you have plenty to say later. Okay, I'll take that as a keep on rolling. We will. So next up is test security. Again, these protocols remain essentially the same from previous years. However, we would like to repeat them just to emphasize the security policies. This is a test administration workshop. This is especially important stuff when you're communicating down to your staff and districts. Breaches of security include, but are not limited to the following items. So analyzing, copying test items, coaching students, giving students answers, allowing students access to digital equipment or unauthorized login to the TDS. Cell phones, including smartwatches, are prohibited by students. Again, these are probably kind of obvious things, but we do want to state them. This is important. That preserves the integrity of our testing. And there's really a lot more information about this in our test coordinators manual. And I'm well aware there's entirely too many words on this slide, so you don't have to drop that in the chat. But this is a straight photo or straight verbatim copy of our wording from our test coordinator manuals and test administrator manuals, just to make sure your team members and schools are aware of what can be done and the implications of when this stuff happens. So please, again, note these things. Again, they're taken right from our test administration manual. Okay. I mentioned this earlier, the attestation page. This is the same usual confirmation screen that districts have seen over the last few years. This will again appear this year, and TAs will have to select OK to advance to begin creating test sessions. This protocol is not new, as we have been doing it for several years. It is critical that proctors and test administrators are trained locally and use the manuals, et cetera, when planning and administering tests. That's really what we're asking folks to do. Again, this box is not new. However, this year, in addition to this, we also will be asking TAs who are starting a test session to literally type in the word summative as not to administer an interim assessment or going the other way. Note that this is not the exact screen because it's not finished yet, but we should have a sample out to districts pretty soon. Again, so as a TA, I will be asked to click yes that I have been trained, and I will be asked to also attest in writing or by typing in that I would like to administer a summative assessment. This one is new to you, to everyone, whether you're a veteran or a rookie DA. This is a new practice this year, so please take note of this one. Okay. Now the fun stuff: improprieties, irregularities, and breaches. Again, none of this is new, but we do want to cover this. This is important stuff. We recognize life happens in schools. Improprieties, irregularities, and breaches happen, but we'll go over these next few slides just to kind of give you an indication what happens if they do. We're always here to help too, obviously, if things happen. So the level of level of security issues are first the impropriety, which is a low impact and doesn't significantly impact student performance. Then an irregularity, which is potentially affecting student performance, test security, or test validity. And then finally, a breach, which is a significant threat to the test validity. So these three buckets, and if you're wondering, at the back of the TCM, there's examples of each one of these. Many examples, actually. It's probably about 98% of what could conceivably happen. But these are the things that could happen during testing when things don't work out, whether it's a fire alarm, a cheating incidents. We recognize this stuff happens, but so these would be the buckets they would fall in. So what do you do when you have something like this happen? Impropriety can be corrected at the local level, and we do recommend that local records are kept just in case we have to follow up at some point. Irregularity, that would be something where you would file an appeal, follow the instructions in the appeal system, and keep your records locally. And then finally, a breach situation. You should contact us immediately at this number or student assessment. Again, if you have a personal connection with any of the team members here, feel free to, I don't know, maybe it might be an email, it might be a mobile number, whatever the case is, just get a hold of someone if you have a breach situation. And again, in Appendix G of the TCM, you will see many examples of the types that could conceivably happen. Okay, appeals. These are the appeals from last year. We say really every year that there's no irregularity that or impropriety or breach that can't be kind of undone without one of these appeals. So these are the flavors of the appeals. Again, we're not going to step through all of these, but if you do have a situation in the district, this is how you would remedy whatever that situation might be. There's much more information on these particular types in the test coordinator's manual. Okay, a couple tips on entering appeals. And I think we've said a few of these for the last couple of years, but we'll say them again. Please enter them carefully and judiciously. Make sure staff who's entering them at the district level are properly trained. We do read every single appeal that comes across our desk. Christy Alberino, who I believe is on our chat, handles the bulk of them. She watches everything when they come in. So please provide information in that text box if you feel that might be helpful. But make sure that whoever is entering them is properly trained so they know how to use the appeal system and enter which appeals are appropriate. Also remember, as far as reopening or grace period extensions, this should be used, again, judiciously. Students should not be allowed back into the test just to double check work if they've already submitted their test. Students are encouraged to review items prior to ending their test. There are times where we get districts that want to go in 2, 3, 4. We're going to look at that very closely. So really we know this stuff happens, like for a student who goes to a doctor's appointment and suddenly didn't have a chance to review their responses. Of course, that's a proper use, but just to get into check answer several times, that would not be a proper use. And then finally, if you have any questions, drop us a line. We're here to help any of us on this call, either through this email, through Christy's email, or the number. And then finally, if you have an accommodation issue, this is not new practice. We ask that you provide a signed letter to the CSDE letterhead to the performance office irregularities, including this information. Christy will likely prompt you if this does occur. So just kind of be mindful that as you put in the appeal, you might already want to gather this information when it comes to an accommodation issue. Final thing on my side, I'm almost done, and I'm going to pass the baton to Jen, is testing time reminders. So many districts are testing. We've looked at the data over the last couple of years and what we've seen. And again, this is just testing time. That's all it is. It isn't, we're not discussing scores or attempts, simple accumulated time. And we've seen over the years that many districts are testing much less than the suggested time. And then some districts are testing much more than the suggested time. Now, when I say much less and much more, significantly much less and significantly much more. And we want you to just remind you that, especially in the extra time case, extra time does not necessarily correlate with better achievement. And it might have to do, it might cause other things. So we just want to remind you to monitor this closely. We know it's a difficult job to get all students through in an appropriate time. These are just suggestions, not exact. They're not exact times, but we do keep an eye on this. And we've actually, years past, we've actually called districts where we've seen some anomalous data coming up. So again, testing times, just keep an eye on it. These are actually the mean testing times from last year, from 22-23. And these means well, let me try this again. There are much higher values than this and much lower values than this. And again, we're warning just to be mindful of that. And again, I will repeat that extra time does not necessarily correlate with achievement. Okay, final slide on my side relating to testing time. A couple things. None of this is new, but just reminders because we see this bubble up during the administration as problematic. First thing is that NGSS can be administered in either one day or over 2 consecutive days. That's the first thing. The recommended testing time is at least 90 minutes for testing with an additional 10 minutes for the reading of the directions to the students. Again, that's for NGSS. And then just a reminder on the pause rules. If a student pauses a test, a 20-minute pause or timer starts. If the student resumes within 20 minutes, they can review previously answered questions. But if they don't resume within 20 minutes, they cannot review their previously answered questions, and you may have to use an appeal. Again, a reminder on the testing time here. Okay, questions before I turn it over to Jen. I know I've seen the chats going nuts here, and thanks everybody for jumping in from the CSDE side. Are there any volunteers who would like to raise their hand and ask their question? I see a question from Thomas. Tom, we're going to address that in a minute or so. So we will, I promise, it's coming. Okay. I see a question for 11th grader. For 11th grade, we have an A/B schedule, so they would not be testing consecutive days. Is that a problem? I don't want to. I'm 99% sure of the answer, but I want to check with Jeff. Jeff, are you on? I don't mean to put you on the spot, or if not, we can. I know Jeff's on the call. I think he can follow up in the chat, but we'll table that one for a minute. Jessica, thanks if you don't mind. Okay, Jeff chimed in, should not be a problem. Thank you, Jeff, I appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to pass the baton to Deirdre, or excuse me, Jen. Jen, you are free to go now with your CAI system update.
Thanks, Abe. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to go through the CAI systems. This is actually my 10th year of doing district training. I was actually counting, Abe, when you were starting the presentation. I didn't realize it had been 10 years, but this is the 10th year of CAI AAR being able to administer assessments for Connecticut, and we're very happy to do so again. I'm not going to go over every detail of all the systems. We are using the same systems as you're used to in previous years, but I will go through some of the highlights, reiterate some information that you probably have heard me say multiple times every year, but we do run into some issues. So I do want to make sure that every district does hear kind of the warnings and the reminders of what needs to be done to have a successful administration. Next slide. The first thing I want to do is talk about the Comprehensive Assessment Program portal. You can see the URL on the slide deck. This is where all the CAI system, links to the CAI system, resources, material, any kind of announcements, alerts, any information that you need to be aware of will be on this portal. So please make sure you bookmark this. There's also a way to register for an email notification when we post updates to the portal, either announcements or resources. So any kind of, if you have any questions regarding any of the assessments, please go to this portal. Our help desk information, contact information will also be there in case you need to find out to contact one of us as well. So it's a secure browser. The secure browser is needed to be able to administer any of the summative assessments. That would be Smarter Balance, CTAA, CALP, and NGSS. We launched the most updated desktop secure browsers in August. So the ones from last year will not work. If you're currently administering interim assessments with the secure browser, you know you have the latest one. If you haven't started doing any kind of testing, please verify with your technology coordinator that you do have the most up-to-date secure browser. If you're using a Chromebook or an iPad, those don't have desktop secure browsers. Those are run through apps. And if you already have that set to automatically update, there's nothing you actually need to do. If we push out an update to the app, it would automatically update on your school's devices. So please make sure before testing that the secure browser is installed on the devices that you're going to be using for testing. Chrome update. We do have a couple slides on Chrome due to the popularity of this device. I believe 90% of the tests taken in Connecticut are off of Chromebooks. So we do want to provide some reminders regarding the use of Chrome and Chromebooks. We currently support versions 113 to 118. There is an asterisk regarding that, and I will go over that in the next couple of slides, but those are the versions that are being supported as of now. Chrome likes to release, or Google likes to release a new version of Chrome every 6 to 8 weeks. And so because of that, we also need around 4 to 6 weeks to test those newer versions to make sure they're compatible with the testing. There aren't new bugs that might affect testing. So if you haven't done so already, we do ask that your devices be locked down on these versions that we support so that there are no surprises that can potentially occur during testing. If you move on to another version, we do allow testing to occur. It's just one of those things that we're not sure if there's any bugs that have been introduced, but we do allow testing to occur because we do know rolling back our versions pretty cumbersome. In addition, the Chromebooks don't last forever. They usually have a 5 to 7 year shelf life. So I have provided a link to the end of life policy for every Chromebook out there. Please have your technology coordinator monitor that. If you have Chromebooks that are about to expire, once they expire, you can no longer use it for testing. And that's not necessarily a CAI policy, but the fact that the operating systems no longer update require us to also retire those devices as well. So I would encourage to make sure that all your devices are still compatible and have not sunset yet. And if they are going to sunset in the next year or 2 years, please make sure you have a plan for being able to purchase new Chromebooks. I do also have one update regarding Chrome, and this has to do with versions 119 and above. So we discovered with version 119 and later that the Spanish voice packs for text-to-speech is no longer installed. And what this means is that if you have a student who needs text-to-speech and also needs it in Spanish, it will no longer work if the student is using a Chromebook with version 119 or higher. This impacts anyone who is taking a math test or a science test. This is something that we're actively working with Google to fix, but right now we don't have a concrete solution in place. So I do know that the science grade 11 assessments is going to open up in a couple weeks. If you have students in this situation who need Spanish text to speech, our recommendation is to have these students take the test using another device. It can still be a Chromebook. It just needs to be a version below 119, or it could be another totally device such as Windows or iPads or Macs. There's also a way to install the Spanish Voice Pack. You can see the steps there on the slide. And if there are any questions regarding this, please contact our help desk. We will be able to help find another solution for you if you do have students who are going to be testing soon and needing Spanish text to speech. As soon as we have a different solution or we know that it's being fixed by Google, we'll definitely post an announcement on the portal, but we will want to let you know of this issue, and also why we do recommend, at the start of the year, if you can lock down those devices, please do so. Okay, I want to go over how to access the systems. If you've been in the systems before, we have rolled over your accounts and reset your passwords in August of 23. So if you have not logged into any of our systems since then, you will be required to retrieve your password. And because it's a new first-time login, you will be emailed a code to initiate that login screen. That's kind of an extra security that we have in place due to our security certificates. And so if you've already been in the system since the new year has started, you're all set. If you haven't, please log into the system to make sure everything is working the way you expect it to. The first system I'm going to go over is Tide and go over some of the updates regarding the test information distribution engine. This is probably our most popular system. Not every user is going to be in the reporting system. Not every user is going to be administering tests, but pretty much every DA will be in the system, maybe daily during the testing window to either monitor participation reports, to look up a student's status, to add a user role. So please make sure that you have the system bookmarked, because you'll probably be in it at least once every day during the window. So things that you can do in Tide, you can add and manage user accounts. So if you have new teachers coming in to the school or you have teachers leaving the school, please make sure you add or delete those accounts in Tide. Review student demographic information. All the information about the student demographic does come from PSIS. So if the information is not up to date in Tide, please verify in PSIS that it is updated there. We do a nightly sync daily to make sure that we have the latest and greatest information. We also do a nightly sync between CT SEDS and Tide. So also that information will be sent to Tide for those students who need accommodations. Please verify that all the information in Tide is correct before testing begins. And additional things that you can do in Tide is submit appeals, run participation reports, and be able to order paper materials. So just to confirm a couple things in Tide, it is kind of the brainchild of the system. If a student is not in Tide, they cannot take an assessment. If a user is not in Tide, they cannot administer an assessment. So please make sure before testing that both your students and your proctors are in Tide. Anyone who's administering a test, not even if it's the TA interface, but also the DEI, must have an account in Tide. Okay, I'm just going to go over a couple enhancements to Tide. They're not actual big features, but more kind of quality of life improvements we made to the system. One of them is the Tide upload process that has been redesigned to modernize how we do the upload process. And this applies to any uploads you'll do in Tide. So this can either be student settings, user roles, or appeals. We have a new modern drag and drop interaction that makes it easier for a district to upload these files. And also made information on upload history and templates more easily accessible to the user, so you're not kind of hunting around the system to find these features. So this is the old upload page. You can see we kind of have a link to download the templates. You can see buried in the bottom is the upload history. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that all that information is now visible and not hidden under links. So we've made a progress bar to allow you to know where you are in the upload process, whether you're beginning the upload stage, whether the file is being validated, or whether it's been processed. You can see that you're able to drag a file from your desktop instead of just doing a strict upload. And on the right-hand side, we have made it more visible where you can download the template or review the history of the uploads. I love the history of the uploads. If there's a district who's having trouble processing their files, it's the first thing I go into to look at your file uploads and see what's going on. So that's a really good area to help troubleshoot if your uploads aren't working. A new feature that we have is the student record update history. So for every student profile, when you go in, there will be a button called the student record update history that allows you to see every change to the student record since the start of TIDE, or when the student came into TIDE. So what I mean about that is if you selected ASL for the student, it will show in the history when that student setting was selected, for what subject, what time and date it happened, and by whom it happened. So there's a lot of questions that we always get as, oh, the student started the Spanish test, but didn't get Spanish, even though the Spanish setting was set in TIDE. And usually on our back end, we can tell that the test was started before the accommodations was set in TIDE. Now that information is visible for you. So if you need to troubleshoot to see why the student received a particular student setting, what tests the students are eligible for, all that information is now part of the student profile. Like I said, if a particular user uploaded or made the changes, you'll see that person's name, as you can see on the slide, it was either Deirdre or myself. If it's through an upload process or through the CTSEDS nightly upload, it will just say system. So any kind of upload or through the CTSEDS nightly process, it will be known as system. If a user did it via the UI, you will see that information in their information in TIDE. Next thing I want to go over is the TIDE participation reports. These aren't new. We've had the 4 since I started running the Connecticut project: plan, manage testing, test status code report, test completion rates, test session status report. Make these reports your friend during the administration. They will tell you who's taken the test and who has not. There was a question actually yesterday regarding test time. We do provide that information. It is under the plan and manage testing report. But the 2 reports I'm going to go into more detail are the test status code report and test completion rates, because as a district administrator, these 2 reports are probably going to be the most helpful for you. The test status code report, this is kind of my favorite report. This is actually a dump of every student in your district who is required to take an assessment. And you can run this report by assessment type. So you can run one for CTAS and for CTA and science and Smarter Balance. It will tell you every student, the test they are eligible to take, if they have started or not, what the test status is, and when they have started the test and when they have completed it. So it's a very nuanced report. For Smarter Balance, every student is eligible for 3 tests, 1 ELA, 2 math. And so you should see 3 rows for every student. And so at the end of the administration, if you're trying to figure out who still hasn't yet tested, an Excel spreadsheet, you can totally sort and filter on the students who have not started tests to pinpoint which students still need to take that test and send the school a reminder. The next report that I also want to highlight is the test completion rates. This is an aggregate level report. So what this will tell you is the percentage of test completion in your district or your school by test. In the beginning of the test administration, the numbers will probably be around 0, 5%, 10%. But by the end of the testing window, you do want to see those numbers around 95, 99%. Probably 2 to 3 weeks before the end of the testing window, the state will run these reports and will probably be calling you if your test completion rates are around 50%, 60%, 70%. It's a reminder that testing does need to be completed by the end of the window. Both the test completion rates and the test status report is a one-time nightly sync. So once you run the report for the day, that's it. It's not like it's going to get updated throughout the day. It will only be updated one time around 3 in the morning. The other reports are in real time. So if you're running a plan managed testing report, that will always update every time you run the report. Moving on to TDS, not many big changes to TDS. We did change up the look and feel of the TA interface by mainly just removing all the dialog boxes and using the entire real estate of the screen. So you can see the old pictures and the new pictures. We just thought with the bigger real estate, we won't have as much scrolling. You can see test labels with longer names. It just allowed for a cleaner look. In addition to that, as you can see from the old slide, all our test sessions, our ability to approve students, add new tests were all on the right-hand side as links, and now we've moved them to the left-hand side as tabs. So you can really basically tab between each of the functionalities. In addition, like I said about the dialogue screen, since we got rid of it, we had more real estate so we can show more students without needing to scroll down. In addition, one additional feature we added is you can pin students of interest to the top of your TA interface. So if there's a student with a particular accommodation that needs some special support from you, or if you know of a student who probably has some behavior that you want to monitor, you can pin those students to the top to make sure as a reminder that you're following their testing activity more closely. A new tool that we've offered is word prediction. This is configurable in Tide, and it's a tool directly in TDS. So there's no pre-installation or pre-setup you need to do. As long as you select it in Tide, it will be there. It is offered for open-ended responses. So these item types will be on the ELA CAT test or the Math PT. It's currently on the interim assessments. We are about to roll it out for the practice test, and they will also show up on the summative assessments as well. In addition to that, in terms of the student experience, when a student came to the very last item of the test, there used to be multiple buttons. It would be an end test button would appear, then a message to say, are you sure you want to submit your test? All those verifications needed to take place before they could actually submit the test, probably 5 clicks before they got to the end. We've removed all that. Once they get to the end of the last item and they hit next, it will take them directly to the review screen where they can go back and review items or just submit the test. It just allowed for easier functionality. We weren't going to ask them 500 times whether or not they're really done submitting the test. And we noticed that some tests were completed but not submitted. So we're hoping that the removal of all these extra steps will allow the test just to be submitted. And you can see the old picture versus the new picture. I'm glad to see someone's very happy with that. So. Okay, any questions regarding the systems? I know that there are a lot of things that I haven't monitored, so I was wondering if someone can ask it or if there's something I need to answer right now.
Jen, there are currently 2 questions.
Okay.
One is from Debbie Allard, and she asks, if we are operating system 20, will that be okay for usage other than the Spanish situation?
So I'm not really sure what the operating system 20 is. I don't know what device you're using, but if you're not using Spanish text-to-speech, any device is okay for testing. It is just this issue with the Chromebook 119 and 120 is only pertaining to those students who need Spanish text-to-speech. And if you have further questions regarding that, contact the help desk or send me an email. We'll be happy to kind of troubleshoot this, because I know not every school has the same setup and stuff. So it does require some additional information before I can give a set response.
Thanks, Jen. And there's another question from Rob, and he was asking for feedback as to whether other districts experienced an exploit in version 118 that allows students to bypass filtering. And I've actually received a call on this more recently about a student who was able to access text-to-speech, even though it's not part of the student's TIE test setting. So do you have any information about this?
This is probably the first I've heard. So if you can contact the help desk, we'll be able to gather more information, including the case, Deirdre, that you have, just to see what may be going on.
Thanks, Jen. And there is another question regarding more prediction. And Katie and I will be addressing this further later in the presentation, but just quickly to let our participants know that word prediction is considered an accommodation. It's brand new for the 23-24 school year. So a student would need to have this accommodation documented in a formal IEP 504 plan.
And then I saw a comment about accommodation for all students were showing up on interim assessments. Kim, if you can send an email, or I'll contact you afterwards regarding that. We'll just try to get a little bit of information. We'll need to see what's going on. We'll ask the same questions. Do you have any student IDs and stuff? And we'll see, their TIE profile, see what's going on. I will say, if you're taking the interim assessment, not with the secure browser, but with the internet browser, a lot of different things can happen because that internet browser is not locked down. So there'll be different pieces of information that we would ask just to verify if there's something going on our end, or if it's an outside thing that we can't control, like using an internet browser. But we'll follow up with you.
Deirdre, I don't see any more. So I think we're good. Actually, Kim, I see you asking this question. I just typed the response here. You could just email me the details and I'll make sure to loop Jen in. All right, thanks, Jen. Deirdre,
right,
you can
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deirdre Ducharme. For those of you who may be new district administrators or new to the assessment program in your district, I'm going to spend some time reviewing accessibility features that are available to our students on statewide assessments, primarily Smarter Balanced and Next Generation. We have a lot of content to cover with the remaining time. So some of the topics that we'll be focusing on pertain to important dates as we move forward towards the test window. We will review eligibility processes for students participating on assessments and those procedures for students with 504 and IEPs. We'll also share some updates related to CT SEDS and the TIDE system, as well as new accommodations and designated supports for spring 24. We'll start off just by reviewing some key dates for applicable teachers and administrators that support students that qualify for Connecticut alternate assessments. As a reminder, for students who potentially are being considered for the alternate assessments, we do require that planning and placement teams complete the student's Connecticut alternate assessment system eligibility form directly within their IEP, and the IEP is located on CT SEDS, or rather in CT SEDS. So this is a somewhat new process. We have some key dates that are specific to the student's grade and assessment that they are eligible for. So you'll see we have a date for February 1st that's specific to students in grades 3 through 8, and maybe newly identified 11th graders that qualify for alternate assessments. And really the goal of knowing who these students are is to allow the department to correctly roster students for assessments such as Lost Links and the Connecticut SAT School Day. So again, the identification for eligibility takes place in CT SEDS. We have a sync directly from that system to Tide so that we can populate students for alternate assessment. And we'll cover some more details about this later on in the training. We also have a date regarding the early stopping rule. The ESR is specifically for a very small subgroup of kids that qualify for alternate assessments. These are students that do not have a demonstrated mode of communication, even with the provision of a communication device or assistive technology. So if you have a teacher that's working with a student that may meet this description that I've provided, just keep in mind that we have a process in which teachers must administer the student response check by February 1st. And then your role as district administrator is to submit the teacher's early stopping rule request and attestation form through Tide by March 1st. And we will cover more details about this later in the training. Some other important deadlines pertain to the KELP domain exemptions. So the KELP assessment starts on February 1st. Again, within this population of students, you may have an EL/ML that may have a impairment in which they're non-communicative, they're not able to participate on the speaking assessment or part of the writing, not the writing assessment, the speaking and listening assessment. So if we have an exemption process for these instances. The exemption process takes place through Tide, and the deadline is March 22nd. And Katie will cover more information about what the KELP domain exemption is later in the session. As far as designated supports, if you have students that do not have a formal IEP or 504 plan, districts should have a systematic process in place for how those supports get entered in a Tide. So if you perhaps have a small school district, maybe it's more manageable to enter those supports directly into the Tide system. Otherwise, you can use a batch upload process. We recommend that all designated supports be entered on the student's Tide dashboard prior to testing. If you're using interim assessments, maybe the student supports are already populated. But we certainly want to have students access their supports before they begin summative testing. And we also have specific dates for students that may qualify for medical exemptions. These dates are assessment specific. So you'll notice that we have an exemption date of March 8th for students taking the loss links versus an April date for the KELP assessment, etc. Katie will talk about who's eligible for medical exemptions, but this is a process for a very small number of students that may be medically unavailable to participate in statewide testing. And so now we're going to transition to who's eligible for supports and accommodations. And I'd like to just open up by reminding all of our educators that the Smarter Balance and NGSS assessments, as well as our alternate assessments, are built on the primary foundation of universal design. And so when we think about the supports that are available either digitally through the test delivery interface, or maybe those supports that are provided to the student by the teacher, that really we're looking at how to best support each individual student. So supports are not a one-size-fits-all. So even though we may offer universal tools that are built into the test delivery system, they're available to all students, it doesn't mean that every student needs or benefits from the tools that are provided. So it's really based on student need and what those specific barriers may be. So the basic level of supports that we provide for our summative assessments are universal tools. They include things like an embedded highlighter, a digital notepad. We have embedded calculators for our students that take math assessments in grades 6 through 8, as well as a Desmos calculator for students who participate on the science assessment. We offer embedded periodic tables for students taking science in grades 8 and 11. It's available in English and Spanish. So again, there are a variety of supports that are available. We also offer optional non-embedded versions of those supports if the embedded tool is not beneficial to students. We've also highlighted a resource sponsored by Smarter Balance. It's called 5 Built-in Test Tools that students should know and use. And we recommend that our teachers actually reference this this resource sheet and use some of these tools with their students directly, modeling how to activate them and navigate these tools within a practice test so that students are aware that they're available and know how to use them. The next level of supports comes in the form of designated supports. We oftentimes receive questions about whether something like text-to-speech for items is a universal tool or a designated support. So I'm going to start off by using that as an example, and that the designated supports is they are tools that are available to all students based on identified student need. And these tools should not be identified in isolation by a single person or educator, but really it should be a conversation by a group of educators, a team of educators that know the student and the student's needs best, and that you're including the student's input as to whether the tool is actually beneficial when using on a summative assessment. And we want these tools to be things that kids are using during instruction anyway. So whether it helps them in the classroom or maybe they're tools that kids are using when they're completing homework at home, outside of the classroom setting, these should be tools that kids benefit from and that they need. So some examples of designated supports include color contrast, text-to-speech of items, not the ELA reading passages, but items for math, science, for ELA. We also include an illustration glossary as shown here on the slide. This is a tool that's available for mathematics, and it's an option, it's a glossary option for students who perhaps they may be an EL, ML whose native language is not represented as an allowable tool for Smarter Balance, but maybe they would benefit from it. Or perhaps a student who is still working through comprehension and language development and might benefit from that illustration glossary. So the takeaway for designated supports is that these are decisions made by a team of educators. And we do have, before the end of this presentation, Katie and I will include a link to an office hours that we held back in December that gives our planning and placement teams and educators some resources and tools that they can use to ensure a systematic process so that supports are determined equitably across their schools and classrooms. And here's an example of what the designated supports look like within the TIDE system. And as a reminder, for kids that don't have formal IEP or 504 plans, designated supports need to be manually entered in TIDE. So what we've shown here is a kiddo that has Streamline available for test taking, as well as some other visual supports that will help the student access the assessment online. We also recommend that if you're looking for information on how to conduct the batch upload or set TIDE test supports, that you refer to the TIDE user guide, specifically pages 39 and 40. The next level of supports comes in the form of accommodations. And so accommodations are embedded, they're also non-embedded. They are changes in procedures and materials that increase equitable access to information. So we're not talking about modifying an assessment, modifying the content, but we're providing alternate means for students to access the information based on need, whether it's visual or auditory, etc. So there's a resource we'll share in a few moments that will give you the long list of accommodations available. Some examples of accommodations, common accommodations used by students include assistive technology, sign language, braille, closed captioning, etc. And so accommodations are determined by a student's 504 convening team or the planning and placement team, and the decisions do involve feedback from the students. So we want to make sure that students have input on which accommodations are most appropriate, that work best for that student based on their experience with the computer, based on what their specific needs are. And ultimately, we're looking at ensuring the greatest amount of accessibility to our students while also maintaining student independence. So perhaps if you're starting off with an accommodation that may require less student independence, try it out on a practice test and see how a student might be able to navigate as independently as possible before you introduce those higher level accommodations. And by higher level accommodations, I'm referencing special documented accommodations. So these are the highest level accommodations that are available to students when those standard embedded and non-embedded accommodations do not provide optimal access. And Katie's going to talk about this in greater detail. We've referenced a webpage here on this slide called the Special Documented Accommodation Resource. We recommend that you spend some time looking at the different special documented accommodations before and sharing this information with teams so that there's a greater understanding about how they work, the purpose, and also what the implications are for statewide testing before the team actually determines that that's the accommodation that the student needs. And as a reminder, in most cases, special documented accommodations require that the students test in a one-on-one setting. So you're going to have to make sure that you have enough staff coverage and that the teacher is trained explicitly in how to provide that accommodation at the time of testing. So there are special guidelines and protocols that need to be completed prior to testing. As a friendly reminder, if you have students that are eligible for accommodations, either via IDEA qualification or Section 504, you're going to want to make sure that these indicators are set in PSIS. So as Abe mentioned earlier today, if you find that the TIDE system does not include an activated yes option for IDEA or Section 504 or even ELML for those students that qualify, you'll want to communicate with your PSIS coordinator and make sure that the student's file is updated correctly. Allow for 24 hours for any changes in PSIS before those changes are reflected in the TIDE system. And then once the updated demographics are reflected in TIDE, if you're noticing any issues with the sync between CT-SEDS and TIDE, then the sync should occur as long as we have these indicators set within the TIDE system. And the third bullet on this slide is important, especially since we have kiddos that started taking interim assessments in the beginning of the school year, and maybe before we had a live sync between CT-SEDS and TIDE. We want to reiterate that accommodations should never be manually entered in TIDE unless there's a rare situation where you contact us and we think that it's an appropriate situation to enter the accommodation in TIDE. Really, the recommendation is that any updates, any changes, additions, etc., they really need to be made by the planning and placement team or the Section 504 team. And it can be done through an amendment, an edit, revise, or perhaps the team will have to reconvene all together and make those decisions as appropriate. And if at the end of the day you have any questions about how this all works, please reach out to us. This is probably one of my favorite resources that we make available. We update it every year. It's an accessibility chart. We have one for Last Links. We created one for the College Board at the Connecticut SAT School Day. This one is specific for Smarter Balance, Next Generation Science Standards. And what we did differently this year is we grouped the embedded support next to, like, we paired the embedded support with a non-embedded version if there's a companion that's applicable. So if we look over here in the left-hand section, you'll see we group the universal tools. So we offer a digital notepad, but then we also offer scratch paper, or for kids who might not benefit from scratch paper but prefer a whiteboard with marker or something like that. You'll see that we list the companion non-embedded tool, and this is something that would be provided to the student by the teacher at the time of testing if it's needed. So another thing to notice about the accessibility chart is we've included hyperlinks for some of these tools. So you'll notice under universal tools, we have a direct link for the keyboard commands. If kids benefit from knowing which keyboard commands to use through, like in an online test setting, you can download and print this resource and make it available to your students. You'll also see under non-embedded for NGSS, the periodic table, we offer the non-embedded English and Spanish printout. So again, that's something you'd have to download, print, and then produce at the time of testing. Some other things to know about the accessibility features: we offer a number of language supports for our ELMLs within the designated support category. So for instance, we offer text-to-speech for Spanish for fluent Spanish speakers. So again, this may not be an appropriate support for those students that are not fluent in they speak Spanish, but perhaps they're not a fluent reader of Spanish. But we also offer a Spanish presentation. We offer translation glossary for non-construct relevant math vocabulary terms. We offer bilingual dictionary for NGSS. So if you're looking for English learner supports, just look for the little we have an asterisk. So that's a tool that may benefit our ELMLs directly. And then for the accommodations, we've included some hyperlinks to the decision guidelines for those considering text-to-speech of the ELA reading passages, and then the companion guide for students that may qualify for a human reader. And Katie is going to go into more details about some of these accommodations. So I'm going to pause and just reiterate that this is a really great tool. Please share it with your teachers, share it with your PPTs and 504 teams, because this does give a good picture of the different options, that accessibility features that are available. But if you're looking for explicit definitions and information about each of the accessibility features and accommodations that are available for all of our assessments, including the Connecticut SAT School Day, we recommend that you refer to the CSD assessment guidelines. And we just posted the updated version. So this is a living, breathing document. It changes frequently, so don't panic if when you logged on a few months ago you saw last year's version. Just know that we will continue to make updates as information is made available. Some other quick mentions: if you have students that may benefit from reader supports, either in the form of a designated support or accommodation, please share the reader options table with your teachers, with your teams. This resource is really important because it delineates the different types of supports available to students who may have who may just be a slow reader versus a student that has a formal reading disability or is identified with dyslexia or a print disability, etc. So I think a really good starting place is to refer to this document. It's available on the portal. We've also hyperlinked it. So it outlines like the nuances between reader designated supports and accommodations, but then it also includes a reader options table that specifies specific requirements for the reader support, and then we provide documentation. So it will aid our educators in determining whether a reader support is appropriate, and if so, which reader support will best aid that student depending on their grade and the assessment that they're taking. If you have students that qualify or potentially qualify for the text-to-speech accommodation for the reading passages, it is required that the team review the decision guidelines. And this process has changed over the years. We used to have the teachers complete this form and then have districts send it to the state. We no longer collect the decision guidelines. We ask that our educators still complete this form, but then maintain it locally. It's important that our district administrators know exactly who is being identified to use this accommodation on the reading assessment. And as a reminder, we're measuring reading comprehension. So unless we're going to change the constructs of what we're assessing, we have to be really careful about when a reader accommodation is provided, when we're explicitly measuring reading comprehension skills according to the Connecticut core standards. So this accommodation is only for students with significant print and visual disabilities. And this guideline requires the team to ensure that the student does have a print or visual disability, maybe dyslexia, for instance. And furthermore, that the student is using like supports and accommodations during instruction. And you know what, text-to-speech isn't for everyone. So if you have a student that is unable to access the embedded text-to-speech accommodation, then maybe the human reader is more appropriate. So we provide the sister guide, which is the documented evidence for a read aloud. And this is a similar screener that walks the team through the process to determine whether a read aloud is more appropriate. And again, this is for students that are using alternate educational materials. Perhaps students are using Bookshare or other online programs to help give them access to digital print. So we ask that the teams complete these forms, maintain them locally, and we do have explicit guidelines that the teacher must follow before this accommodation is provided during assessment. So we reference here the read aloud guidelines. There's a protocol, a test security confidentiality protocol that must be completed by the teacher who is serving as the human reader. So just keep in mind that these guidelines provide some explicit information about how and when the accommodation should be used, and then how to actually deliver that accommodation at the time of testing. We've also highlighted the embedded and non-embedded designated support brochure for our English learner, multilingual learners. This is not new, but it's updated every year, and we've highlighted some resources that some of our students may benefit from. Again, this is not a one-size-fits-all. You have to really know what your student, your EL, ML's learner language needs are and how to best support them. So certainly work with your teachers that know these students best. And then just to conclude, allowing students time to practice the online test format, the universal tools, designated supports with a practice test. So we can't recommend this enough, especially for our newest students, our third graders that are going to be participating in statewide testing for the first time. We want kids to feel really confident in how to navigate the assessment. We want them to know about the different kinds of item types that they're going to see. So again, teachers should actively model how to access these practice tests, how to use them, how to navigate the tools, etc., so that students can feel their best and do their best when they actually take the spring assessment. So Katie's now going to walk us through the next portion of this presentation. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Deirdre. So now we're going to talk about this year we have a few new accessibility supports offered for Smarter Balance and NGSS. These new designated supports included translated test directions in American Sign Language, or ASL, and printed test directions in English. So when we're talking about translated test directions in American Sign Language, which is a non-embedded designated support, this is available for Smarter Balanced Math and Smarter Balanced ELA assessments in grades 3 through 8 only, and NGSS in grades 5, 8, and 11. This designated support is intended for students who are deaf or are hard of hearing. This is also a language support that allows a qualified test administrator to sign or provide visual language supports of the test directions script within those say boxes in the Test Administration Manual, or the TAM. For printed test directions in English, which is also a non-embedded designated support that is available for Smarter Balanced Math and Smarter Balanced ELA assessments in grades 3 through 8 only, and NGSS in grades 5, 8, and 11. This language support provides students with a visual reference in English for the test direction script within the say boxes in the Summative Test Administration Manual, or the TAM. This test administrator, when using this, must download the directions from the Connecticut Comprehensive Assessment Program portal in advance of testing and print and distribute this designated support to the students at the time of testing. Additionally, this year, we have translated test directions for Smarter Balanced ELA and Math, not available for science, in Portuguese. This is new this year. This is a word-to-word translation of the directions and functions students will encounter when using the online test delivery system, or TDS. PDFs of terms are available for Smarter Balanced ELA and Math only. A bilingual adult for Portuguese reads to the student, or if the student is literate in Portuguese, they may read the terms independently. The use of the support may result in the student needing additional overall time to complete the assessment, as well as a separate setting. So please be mindful of that. The other thing that is updated or new this year is Spanish, and for Spanish presentation is math and science toggle. This is an embedded support. The Spanish presentation will allow the student who is literate and Spanish speaking to toggle between full Spanish translation of the item and the English version of the item. By default, all test directions, navigation buttons, and test content will be presented to the student in the Spanish language. This support should only be used for students who are proficient readers in Spanish and who are not proficient in English. Once again, the use of the support may result in the student needing additional overall time to complete the assessment and may increase the reading and cognitive load. We talked about earlier, Jen mentioned that we have a new accommodation this year, and it is word prediction. This accompanies open-ended items for on the ELA and math. Word prediction can be used as a standalone or used in conjunction with speech to text. It allows the students to begin either writing a word or saying a word, usually by the first or second grapheme. A word will appear in the box. This is, if this accommodation is selected, this accommodation is on. It's not turned on or off. So if the student is using word prediction and they start typing or they start saying a word, they can choose from the box that is presented a word that populates from below. It is only a word, it is not a phrase. This word prediction accommodation is only available for Smarter Balanced Math and Smarter Balanced ELA assessments for open-ended items in grades 3 through 8 only. So here, what we have here for you is an example of the student dashboard will look like for adding designated supports in for students who are not special education or Section 504 for Spanish presentation and the text-to-speech in Spanish. So this is just a quick little slide just so you can see how this is presented if you are adding this accommodation for non-special ed, non-Section 504 students. We are now going to do some accommodation reminders. So one of the accommodation reminders we want to remind staff, and I know this has been mentioned throughout the throughout this presentation, is that the accommodations are populated through CT SEDS and tied from active and implemented IEPs that cover the grade level that are selected within the IEP. When teams assign accommodations, they will also need to ensure that they are not assigning conflicting accommodations. So as DAs, as you're going through and you're reviewing and checking accommodations, it's important to check and note if there's any conflicting accommodations. For example, this may be text-to-speech, which is embedded, and then the non-embedded version of read aloud. They should not be checked in conjunction. When reviewing accommodations, and checking this, if the DA notices that there is an error and there's confliction, please contact either the case manager or the Section 504 coordinator to identify those errors, and then the team can correct these errors either through an amendment or a revise IEP for that to ensure that there is no confliction. So now we're also going to review some accommodations and specific accommodations we just want to remind you of. So the first one is large print or braille tests. For students that are unable to access online assessments with embedded and non-embedded accommodations, they may be able to use the large print or braille test booklet. Even if this accommodation is selected in CT SEDS by the PPT or Section 504 team, the DA still needs to place this order within TIDE. These test materials must be ordered by the DA for testing in TIDE on or after January 26 of 2024. The PPT or Section 504 team must select these accommodations in CT SEDS, and once the plan is implemented, the accommodations will sync in TIDE. Look for these accommodations as shown here on the slide for the large print selections or braille selections. The DA will want to review on the student dashboard as well as collaborate with a special education teacher to ensure that the correct braille presentation is ordered in TIDE. So when ordering paper materials in TIDE, As a DA, you're going to log into the TIDE system. In preparing for testing, you're going to go to orders. After you go to orders, you're going to go to district or school. Then you'll enter the quantity needed for each of the testing materials. Districts can track their shipments in TIDE. The DA will also receive instructions with the test materials. As a reminder, tests are secure and should be securely maintained before, during, and after testing. Once the student has completed testing, the teacher will use the data entry interface to transcribe the student responses to all subtests. This is how the tests are scored and the scores are reported. All transcriptions must be made by May 31st, 2024. All systems will close at the end of business on that testing day. So now we're going to go over in a little bit more detail about special documented accommodations. In exceptional circumstances, there may be a student whose disabilities are such that allowable embedded and non-embedded accommodations described in the CSDE assessment guidelines provide insufficient access to Smarter Balanced and/or the NGSS assessments. Special non-standard accommodations may be appropriate for those students based on their unique learning needs. These must be determined by the planning and placement team or Section 504 team for the students with this identified need based on evidence documented within that student's plan. These accommodations typically align to those used by the student during instruction and/or in their learning environments. Based on these PPT and Section 504 determinations, special documented accommodations should be selected within the student's IEP or Section 504 plan and CT SEDS. The team will select the verification box within the special documented accommodations sections of the accommodations menu as an attestation that the accommodation is appropriate. Once this plan is implemented, the student's accommodations will sync with TIDE. I want to note that scribe and read aloud of ELA passages additionally require the test administrator to review specific guidelines and complete the security and confidentiality agreements for each of the specific accommodations. Additionally, for read aloud of the ELA passages like Deirdre showed us earlier, the team should complete the documented evidence for read aloud of the Smarter Balanced ELA passages and submit this completed form to the DA as well. For print on demand and customized accommodations, please contact us at the CSDE. So one thing that we want is just some reminders for our DAs for when we're considering special documented accommodations is that with these accommodations, like I said earlier, print on demand and customized accommodations need to be cleared through the CSDE. Additionally, DAs need to develop a plan for reviewing the following. So accommodations and special documentation, special documented accommodations. The DA needs to work with their data manager in CT SEDS and verify in TIDE the accommodation reports for these students who have the accommodations either assigned through an IEP or Section 504 plan. Additionally, TTS of ELA passage guidelines and the read aloud of passage guidelines. Those documents, the DA should develop a plan for reviewing and maintaining these documents within their district. Training is key and important. So all educators are aware of not only special documented accommodations and how that works within the system, but all accommodations and designated supports. So training is key, not only for students or staff, but also for students as well. So that gets into having those students, their training is going to be through the practice tests. So they're familiar with those accommodations within the testing platform. So preparing for accommodations also and implementing and the implementation for the summative assessment. So knowing what those accommodations are, and that may be the materials needed. For example, that may be mathematics or if selected in the IEP or Section 504 plan, or they may need headphones. Scheduling, that is for both practice tests and summative tests, as well as room assignments for separate setting. And additionally, staff assignment. So who needs to be there, who is going to be assessing, who is going to be that test administrator for that session. So now we're going to be talking about medical exemptions. So students who are hospitalized or homebound due to illness should be tested unless there are medical constraints. These students can have the test administered at home or in a hospital, provided the test administered by a certified school staff member who is fully trained in the proper test administration and security procedures for the specific assessment system. Lost Links, KELP, Smarter Balanced, NGSS, Connecticut SAT, CTA, and/or CTOS. In rare cases, there may be a student who experiences a medical emergency just prior to or during the testing window. There is a process whereby the student may receive an exemption from testing due to the emergency nature of the medical condition. If the criteria for exemptions are met, a medical exemption can be given to a student depending on the availability of the student during the statewide testing window. This process is described in the assessment guidelines, which is hyperlinked here on this slide. We want you to please be aware of the deadlines for medical exemptions for each of our unique assessments. If you need, you can contact me or Deirdre if you think you have a student who is eligible for a medical exemption. So now we're going to go over the early stopping rule for our CTA, CTOS, and KELP assessments. Listed here is the 2023-2004 Connecticut Assessment Early Stopping Rule. The early stopping rule is a process used by the CSDE to support students who are nonverbal and do not have an established observable mode of communication. Typically, the students who are eligible for the ESR are those students who have the most complex needs as compared with their peers with significant cognitive disabilities. Often, these students do not use oral speech or do not have an established communication system. For this small group, these characteristics, their teachers will follow the instructions in the ESR document to determine the eligibility for the ESR. This needs to be done prior to the testing window. In short, teachers will complete the student response check, which is an Appendix A, on 3 separate days or 3 separate occurrences. And this is going to be like 3 separate days, 3 separate times. This is to ensure that we are really looking at that student and having a full picture of how they are. So for example, they may administer it, say a Monday morning, a Tuesday midday, and a Wednesday afternoon to get a clear snapshot of that student's capabilities. They will also complete Appendix B, which is the SRC administration behavioral notes outlining for each response check. If the student meets the criteria for the ESR, the teacher will also complete the early stopping rule request and attestation form and submit this to their DA by February 1st, 2024, if they qualify. At that point, then the DA will submit the form by March 1st, 2024 for review and approval. If approved, the district administrator will receive an email with the approval. So how to submit the, what's also new this year is not only on how to submit the ESR, but what's new this year is as you're submitting the ESR, there's going to be a new ESR code included. So as you log in to complete your early stopping rule in TIDE, the first thing you're going to do is as you log in, you're going to go to preparing to test and you're going to do select forms. After you do select forms, you're going to select the early stopping rule from the drop-down menu. Then you can complete the form and submit the form with the uploaded Appendix C completed in entirety. After the form is submitted in TIDE and is reviewed by the CSD, if a form is approved by the CSD, the ESR indicator will be activated on the student dashboard. It is important to communicate this to your TEAs to check the student dashboard to see if the ESR is clicked to yes in the TIDE system. So now we're going to discuss CT SEDS and TIDE. So currently, what we are providing a one-way import of accommodations from CT SEDS into TIDE. Please remember to allow up to 48 hours for the accommodations to appear in TIDE following the IEP or Section 504 implementation date. And it's really important to note that it is the implementation date and not the date the IEP was finalized. Additionally, the CSDE is providing a weekly one-way import of the ALT eligibility data from implemented IEPs and CT-SEDS to TIDE. This data will turn the ALT flag indicator on or off depending on the IEP status. If the ALT flag is not populating TIDE, please check in CT-SEDS to verify that the student has an alternate assessment eligibility form implemented within CT-SEDS. So now we're going to go and look at how in CT-SEDS the alternate statewide testing is designated. So this page shows that how PPT and Section 504 teams go in and activate statewide testing designated supports and accommodations. So as the IEP or the PPT or Section 504 team is completing the IEP, they will go into the state and district testing tile. Once in the state, district, and testing tile, they will need to select the grades that will be covered for the duration of the IEP. For example, if the plan runs from February 2024 to February 2025, that will cover 2 grade levels. Therefore, both grade levels need to be selected so that the designated supports and accommodations can be selected for each assessment within that grade level. So as indicated here, if we check on so the IEP runs from grades 5 into grade 6, they would check grades 5 and grade 6. Grade 5 would populate for both math, ELA, and science. After that, grade 6 would populate if checked for math and science, or math and ELA. Once you see those green buttons, that's where they would click on those green buttons and add those designated supports and accommodations that the PPT and Section 504 team agreed upon. So we have here also some additional information to support our districts with CT-SEDS, frequently asked questions, and resources to help determine accommodations and statewide assessments. So the first resource that we have here is the resources for PPTs and Section 504 teams in CT-SEDS and statewide assessments. This here are some quick guides and some resources that will help not only with designating the appropriate accommodations and designated supports, but also for alternate assessment eligibility. And these resources cover resources for Smarter Balanced, NGSS, Lost Links, our alternate assessment, and Connecticut SAT School Day. We also have here the CT-SEDS to TIDE designated supports and accommodations frequently asked questions. Some examples of questions that we address here are for example, how do districts know if a student's IEP or Section 504 plan has been implemented or finalized? How do districts locate which designated support or accommodation is documented in CT-SEDS and are important to TIDE for individual students? So those are some examples of some questions, and there's many more that are also in our FAQ for CT-SEDS. So now we're going to go over the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System, and I'm going to pass it back over to my colleague Deirdre to get us started.
Thanks, Katie. So we're just going to take a few minutes to review the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System and some of the details that are specific to the assessment and training, etc. So let's just get started by reviewing the test window for our assessments. We'll begin with the CALP. So the CALP is our alternate English language proficiency assessment for students with significant cognitive disabilities that qualify for an alternate assessment using the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System eligibility form. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially for our ELMLs in grades K to 12, if the team determines that the student has a significant cognitive disability, they'll complete the eligibility form. And if it's determined that the student is eligible, they'll participate in CALP. That window opens on February 1st, and they have about 2 months to complete it. The last day of testing is March 29th. As far as our other assessments, the next window opens for the CTAA, Math and English Language Arts. That test window aligns with Smarter Balanced. It opens March 25th, and teachers have until May 31st to administer the assessments. And then for our science, our alternate science assessment, because this is a paper-based performance task, teachers can administer CTAS year-round. So essentially the deadline is March 31st. Who can administer these assessments? We recommend, or actually request, that any teacher that participates in the administration of an alternate be assigned the TEA user role and TIDE, and that is true for CALP as well, because our teachers administering the CALP are going to be using the same Cambium assessment system, the test administration protocol, and the secure browser. So we require that teachers have a TEA user role. I've already talked about the eligibility process. So again, this is based on the planning and placement team and completing the form within CT SEDS. The takeaway, though, is that we want to make sure that students that are eligible for an alternate assessment have their alt flag indicator set in TIDE, and this happens automatically through a sync that occurs between CT SEDS and TIDE. Right now we're conducting this sync weekly. At some point, hopefully sooner than later, it's going to happen automatically nightly, like our accommodations file. So what the alt flag indicator in TIDE allows is this, it will populate only the alternate assessments on the test menu, so that when teachers go ahead to administer the alternates, they will only see alternate assessments on the student's menu. We've included here the different grades for which students will participate on these assessments. So for our math and English language arts students that qualify for these assessments will take alternates in grades 3 through 8 and 11 for math and English language arts. Our alternate science is available for students in grades 5, 8, and 11. And already as mentioned, for CALP, this assessment is available for qualified students in grades K through 12. So this is actually potentially a new assessment and process for those teachers in non-academic tested grades. So in perhaps your early elementary classrooms, you'll need to provide staff with a little extra training so that they're familiar with the online test system and test procedures, protocols, etc. Only because they're, you know, they don't have a reason to know the nuances with Smarter Balanced or science for kids in the older grades. The test delivery method, the alternate math and ELA, as well as CALP, these assessments are online using the same platform that students use to take Smarter Balanced. And then the science, as mentioned, it's a paper-based assessment. So the teachers are going to be working directly with their students to administer the performance task. We require that teachers review the test administration manuals that are created explicitly for each of these assessments. And there are some added materials that our trained TEAs will need to review. So for instance, at the time of testing for math and English language arts, teachers will download the directions for test administration from the TIDE system. These directions are to be used in conjunction with the test administration manual, but they include the teacher scripts and scoring rubrics and other ancillary information that teachers will need to use with their students. And then we have a similar set of directions for the CALP. And again, these are materials that should be downloaded from TIDE by the TEA prior to testing. And then we also post the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Science required materials on our website. So if your teacher needs the student's score worksheet, it can be downloaded directly from the portal. We have a companion manual that can also be downloaded and reviewed prior to testing. And the materials are, the manuals themselves are non-secure. The assessments for CALP as well as the CTAA are considered secure. We require training for all of our teachers that participate in administering these assessments. There is a separate training for CALP. It's located on ALPA 21 website. I've included some information about this in the chat box, but Katie is also going to provide some details about CALP training and resources later in this presentation. Teachers can download certificates upon completing the training and quiz, and they're able to download those certificates and maintain them as indication that they've completed the quiz. For the CTAA, we automatically populate the teacher's TIDE dashboard so that their trained certification is indicated in TIDE. And so as a DA, you can actually view those teachers who've completed their training up until this point. We referenced the data entry interface, and this tool is used for students that participate in the alternate science assessment. And so the kids themselves aren't using the DEI, but once the teacher has completed the administration of science, they're going to enter the students' the ratings from the student score worksheet directly into the DEI. And it's important that this happen before the last day of testing, which is May 31st. So the DEI opens with the onset of spring testing on March 25th, and it is important that teachers do input the student responses so that they can be scored and that students can receive a report at the end of, well, when we release the results in the summertime. All right, Katie's now going to briefly give you some information about the ELA the CTAA ELA assessment for students in grades 3 and 4.
So thank you, Deirdre. For students in grades 3 and 4 taking the CTA ELA reading assessment, the TEA needs to select either verbal or nonverbal test form within the TIDE system settings prior to the administration. The forms differ in presentation from the foundational word identification items or open response items. Based on the student's mode of communication, the verbal or nonverbal form should be selected in TIDE prior to that test administration. We have here shown just for you guys a quick slide, just showing what your TEA is going to check when they are looking at the student dashboard. They are going to determine whether it is the verbal or nonverbal form, and this is going to be important that they do prior to test administration and the downloading of the DTAs. So here we have for you the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System eligibility form. As we mentioned previously, this form is completed as part of the PPT process within CT-SEDS. This document is required to register students for the CTAA, CTOS, and the CALP assessments. The PPT completes this form via the PPT process, and when they're completing this form, they are looking at documenting and providing evidence of a significant cognitive disability. What this means is that they are going to be looking at providing evidence of an intellectual impairment, as well as adaptive functional skills that are well below age and grade level expectations, and that the student requires intensive and extensive instruction throughout their school day and throughout their school setting to support them. We have listed here the annotated Connecticut Alternate Assessment Eligibility Form. This is a great tool for PPT teams to review and look at because it provides information for each one of these areas and categories that they will be encountering when they're in the CT-SEDS platform. Here we have for you what it will look like in the CT-SEDS platform when they're going through as the part of the PPT process and discussing a student's potential for alternate eligibility. As you see here in step 1, the PPT is going to indicate the grades that this IEP is going to be covering. They're going to be looking at, is the student being considered for participation in the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Eligibility Form? As soon as they click yes, they will then click save. Once they click save, then the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Eligibility Form will populate. And in this form, this is where they're going to be documenting that proof of the intellectual impairment, the proof of the adaptive functional skills well below that grade and age level expectation, as well as that the student requires the intensive and extensive instruction. And then finally, they're going to verify this information and then click save. After the IEP has been implemented within the CT-SEDS PPT process, then there will be that sync, as Deirdre mentioned, between TIDE and CT-SEDS on that weekly basis. As a reminder, just for teams, that the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Facility form is also determined that KELP eligibility for our duly identified ELs and MLs with those significant cognitive disabilities in grades K through 12. Therefore, PPTs will need to consider this for EL MLs that are duly identified, whose IEP covers grades K through 12, which may be new for some teams. We have listed here some resources to help teams in determining Connecticut alternate assessment eligibility. So now we're going to get into talking about the alternate assessment system training requirements for the CTA and CTAS. For the CTA and CTAS, the Connecticut alternate assessment training must be completed annually by certified educators administering the alternate assessment, or our TEAs. The training is online and available through the Connecticut Alternate Assessment webpage on the portal. Like Deirdre mentioned, the TEAs must complete and pass the end of training quiz with a score of at least 80% in order for them to populate within the TIDE system as a trained proctor or TEA in TIDE. We've also included here some resources, not only for district administrators, but for our teachers who are administering the alternate assessment. Things that they should print down and be aware of are the CTA Test Administration Manual, the CTAS Test Administration Manual. We've hyperlinked on the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Training course for ease of access. And also on the final link that we have here are all the resources that are applicable for the TEA when they are completing the online training. We have also have here for you are the training information for the KELP assessment. As Deirdre mentioned, the KELP assessment is not through our TIDE system, but is through ELPA 21. This is through the partnership of CREST and ELPA 21. You will click the link here for ELPA 21 for them to access. Once again, just like the CTAA and CTAS training, this is required annually by our TEAs administering KELP. One thing to note is that the KELP training, because this is part of ELPA 21, does say that the TEA is valid for a certain time period. So we just want to remind staff and our DAs that this can be completed annually, even if it says that the training is from like May to May. That it has to be completed each new school year. So if a TEA is new to the ELPA 1 training system, they're going to be asked for a district verification code. The district verification code is all lower cases and it's ELPA 21. The certificates are not housed in TIDE, as Deirdre mentioned, but they need to be maintained locally. So as a DA, you will want to set up a process of how these training certificates are going to be maintained. We have here some KELP resources, and because one of the things is with the ELPA 21 is because this was developed by the consortium, there may be some policies and procedures that are in the ELPA 21 training that may not be Connecticut specific or follow Connecticut policies. So it's really important that your TEAs who are taking this training have the following documents: the 2023-2024 Connecticut Alternate Assessment Early Stopping Rule, the KELP TAM, the KELP Accessibility and Accommodations Manual. Those are 3 documents that need to be reviewed and the teams need to be aware of that have Connecticut specific policies. We've also listed here for you our KELP training announcement and directions for accessing the KELP online training for both new and returning users. This provides a step-by-step guide on how to access the ELPA 21 training, as well as how to find the ELPA 21 training that is applicable for our TEAs in Connecticut. We also have additional training available, and that is the KELP office hours for our teams. So we're now going to be looking at who should be administering the KELP. So educators or administrators who are administering the KELP are determined by the district. And these educators should be familiar with the student and are those educators who support ELs and MLs, or educators who support special education, or both special education and EL, ML educators supporting students. Additionally, there's KELP domain exemptions. Just like the last links, there's KELP domain exemptions. We have hyperlinked the KELP domain exemptions guidance document here for you. So a small number of students with significant cognitive disabilities may be unable to participate in either the listening or speaking domain of the KELP assessment, and this is due to the complexities of their disabilities. If a student is identified as deaf or hard of hearing, they may not be able to participate in the listening subtest due to their disability and may be eligible for a domain exemption for the listening subtest. Students who are nonverbal, and even when provided assistive technology and augmentative and alternate communication supports, may not be able to participate in the speaking subtest and may be eligible for exemption of the speaking domain. Domain exemptions are submitted by the district administrator and tied between November 15th through March 22nd, 2024. Prior to submitting a domain exemption and tied, please ensure that the student has the alt flag turned on and tied prior to submitting the form. Also, ensure this form is submitted prior to the testing the student, and this information is communicated and expectations are clearly set for all test administrators. For information about KELP domain exemptions, please visit the KELP domain exemption guidance document. We do list out even how to submit the domain exemptions within that document. So now we're going to be going over the reprint of the CTAS materials. This year in October, CEI mailed DAs for testing a new supply of CTAS materials. As districts and DAs, you should create a system to share the materials across schools and store them for future use. Also, you can continue to use the CTAS materials from previous years shared by teachers for test administration throughout this school year. One thing to note is that for 2003, 2004, the CTAS student score worksheets need to be printed and downloaded from the portal for each student, and they should be securely maintained until the testing is completed and that the student's information is uploaded into the data entry interface by May 31st. So entering into the data entry interface. When we're looking at entering into the data entry interface can be accessed via the portal under the Smarter Balanced NGSS or alternate assessment program cards. As mentioned in the previous slide, the TEA can submit the CTAS into the data entry interface no later than May 31st of this calendar year. Additionally, for students who take the paper, braille, and large print Smarter Balance and NGSS assessments, teachers must transcribe the students' responses from these booklets into the data entry phase, also no later than May 31st, 2024. Just a reminder, all secure large print and braille materials must be returned to the Measurement Incorporated by the end of the testing window, and that instructions are included with the shipment materials. So now we're going to talk about required secure alternate assessment materials. The required materials for the CTA, or the Directions for the Test Administration, or the DTAs, and the KELP Directions for Test Administration, or DFAs, are in the secure testing materials and may only be accessed by users with a TEA status or the DA role and TIED. When TEAs go in to log in to TIED, they will need to ensure as they're logging in, they're correctly selecting the correct user role, because they may have two user roles. They may be either a TA and a TEA. So it's important to remind them that in order for them to access these materials, they need to select the correct user role of TEA. Once they are in the system, they are going to go to Preparing for Testing and go to Secure Test Materials. They are then going to download these secure test materials based on the grade and the subject that they will be testing. So as DAs, you can confirm your trained TEA status in TIED. So DAs can roster and TIED to confirm that those TAs who have been trained. We have highlighted the steps on this slide. If a teacher indicates that they have completed the training and passed the quiz, but do not have access to Connecticut Alternate Assessment System eligibility, or their the Connecticut Alternate Assessment systems, as far as like being able to administer or download the secure testing please go back in and check to see if their TIDE user role shows that they have the trained TEA status or trained proctor status in TIDE. This will also give you the opportunity to, prior to testing, see who your trained TEAs are, and if it's getting close to the testing window, to send out those reminders to those TEAs saying, hey, you need to complete the testing or the training before you administer the test. So now we're going to have it. So we're going to open it up to questions.
Kitty, if it's okay, I'm just going to jump in because we did have a few questions about KELP training.
Absolutely.
One question has to do with the population of the trained proctor fields on the teacher's TIE dashboard. So that field is only populated for the teachers that complete the Cambium required training, the CTAA CTAS. But do you want to share with our colleagues what happens when they complete the KELP training through ELPA 21?
Absolutely. So once the TEA completes the KELP training through ELPA 21, they will get a certificate of completion. They will be able to go to their homepage or their main dashboard to print down the PDF of their certificate of completion. They need to maintain that in their records, and the district also needs to come up with a process of how they're going to maintain those records of those trained TEAs for KELP.
So then my question, I know the answer, but for those that may be still confused, what will a teacher need if, like in the TIDE system, in order to administer the KELP?
So in the TIDE system, the teacher will need the TEA status designated to them by the DA in TIDE.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So if you don't have a TEA user role, and if you haven't completed the required training for the CTAA and CTAS, and those are the assessments that you're expected to administer, you're not going to be able to access them through the system. But KELP is different. KELP is kind of like a standalone right now. So in order for teachers to access that KELP assessment, they do need the TEA user role. And then, like Katie said, training is conducted using a separate platform. Right, so I'm not sure whether all the questions in the chat were addressed. Do I assume that the training links for TAs are included in this presentation? Yes, we included almost everything but the kitchen sink in this training, but if you are looking for something and you can't find it either on the portal or on the student assessment webpage, please let us know. We have links to we have PDFs of the training modules that were developed for our teachers administering the alternate assessments. We have responsibility checklist. We have just a variety of resources that will hopefully aid our teachers administering these assessments. So if you need help in locating them, just reach out to us. But we included a number of resources within this training.
Deirdre, I think most of the questions that were asked in the chat, if not all of them, were addressed. So, I mean, we can certainly take a minute now if you have any more to drop in, or if you want to raise your hand, we can certainly use that feature as well if you want to ask your question through the Teams here.
So Abe, I'm going to just take a look at one question here that was provided by Melissa. Is there a way for staff to start the KELP training if the ELPA system is saying their training is still valid, but they need to be retrained for the school year? So TEA is going into the ELPA 21 system because it is a new training for this year. They revamped all their training. They can go in, and we are suggesting for this year, because the training is new, that all TEAs, even if they're returning for administration of the KELP, do take the first time user training as outlined within how to access the KELP training. So they should be able to click that assessment or that training in there and have no problem accessing it.
Thanks. Thank you, Katie. So are there any more questions either through the chat or through the raise hand feature? We can wait a minute here. We're 50 minutes early on the ending time, so we have plenty of time here. Or we can call it a training. Oh, I see Joanna. Hold on one second. You should be able to unmute yourself now, Joanna.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I really understood about the CALP, because we have teachers who are giving the CALP who are not trained in CTAA or CTAS, because there's different groups. They submit their certificate to me and then I mark them in as a TEA in TIDE, correct? I just want to make sure I really understood that properly.
Yes. You
Okay.
have that, Joanne. Yeah.
And just to reiterate, especially to your teachers in grades K to 2 and teachers in grades 9, 10, 12, more than likely, there's no reason why they would need to complete the training on the alternate assessments for the academic tests. So don't make sure that they're not alarmed and thinking that they need to complete 2 separate alternate trainings. They only need to complete CALP if that's the assessment that they're administering.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Joanna.
I see another hand up. Mr. Walton, William Walton, hold on up. Let me unmute you here. Okay, William, you're all set. You have to unmute yourself too. There you
we
go.
go. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm clear with regards to the training that TAs need to take. If the only test we're administering is the NGSS or the standard assessment, I'm drawing a pure blank on it, but I think you know what I'm referring to. Do the TAs still need to be retrained? I know they have to reactivate their password and everything, but do we need to go to a training again in order for them to function?
Yeah, that's a great question. And our recommendation is that our district administrators, more than likely that's you, William, that you will provide your own localized training to your staff. And what that looks like varies from location to location. It may simply be, hey, teachers, please review the test administration manual for Smarter Balance and NGSS. Or maybe it's, here's a PowerPoint that was developed by the CSDE and please take some time to review this PowerPoint. Or maybe it's your own personalized training. So it looks different from district to district, but we would expect that any teacher or administrator that's involved with test administration be trained by someone expert, and that is you. So whatever that looks like, however you deem that appropriate, is at your discretion.
All right. So that means no, I don't necessarily need to send them to a website to pull up anything. If I give them the information that we got today, then that's sufficient.
Absolutely. And the explicit trainings we've referenced as of late regarding the alternate assessment in CALP, that's for a very, again, that's a very specific assessment that has an entirely different set of test procedures and expectations for administration. So that's why we have these separate required trainings, but that's not something that you have to participate in or provide to your teachers unless they're administering alternates.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, William. Are there any other questions anybody would like to ask? You can ask a question outside of assessment too, if you'd like. I'm not sure we would know the answer, but. And I don't see any more chat questions, Dee and Katie. All right, well, I thank you very much for attending today. We appreciate your patience. Please reach out if you need anything. Katie and Deirdre, do you guys want to say anything before you depart? Thanks.
I do. I mean, I certainly want to say thank you, but I'd also like to extend just true appreciation for all of the hard work that you give to your colleagues and students each and every day. And certainly your collaboration and partnership is critical to the assessment program. And we certainly could not deliver a successful assessment without your support. So thank you for your partnership. And this is always, it's great to see you even though we're not in person, but we do appreciate and recognize all of the hard work that you do for your schools and students each and every day. So thank you.
Cheers to that.
I say, well said, Deirdre. I definitely agree with that. And once again, thank you again, everyone, for everything that you do for your staff and your students.
Okay, thanks again, everybody. Again, this will be all posted, and we will email you next week with the resources for the recording and the PowerPoints and so forth. So stay tuned. We owe you a couple things. Have a great afternoon and be well. Thank you.